Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Tigers Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Chris Schulte. Having some technical issues. They abound at this point. We will talk more about that at some other time. But we're going to go ahead and get this thing started. I do apologize for the air conditioner noise. I apologize for a lot of other noise that's involved here. I honestly thought that some production things were in place, but it appears they're not, and so we're just going to go with what we have, and we're going to do a podcast. This podcast is officially being recorded on Thursday, August 3rd. It will be published later today, but it's going to be a bit because I'm going to go to bed after I get done with this. So, with that all being said, first of all, thank you for listening. Secondly, let's go ahead and get into some injury updates real quick. No word on Will Vest, whether or not he's throwing he's gone to any rehab assignment or anything of that nature. Spencer Turnbull has had 2 rehab starts. He will probably get 3 more in Toledo. His first 2 are, of course, in in West Michigan, and he looked pretty good in both starts. Gave up 2 runs over 3 innings last time out, but he will be needed in Detroit very soon, and we'll get to that. Well, right now, let's go ahead and do that. Casey Mize, by the way, is still throwing bullpens. He probably will not start for Detroit this year, but if nothing else, hopefully he gets into a rehab assignment at least. And we'll go ahead and talk about the trade deadline. Eduardo Rodriguez did not get moved. Michael Lorenzen did. A lot of people assumed that Chasen Shreve and Jose Cisnero would possibly get moved. They did not. No word as to whether or not they were even on the trade market. Nobody, as far as I know, said anything about whether or not they were fielding they were making offers for them or anything of that nature. So honestly can't tell you any more than that because I honestly don't know. But with all that being said, Michael Lorenzen gets traded to Philly. So once again, Scott Harris. It was really funny because when he traded Gregory Soto and Cody Clemens to Philly for Nick Maton, Matt Vierling, and Donnie Sands, he said, "I just made a trade with the guy that used to have this office." And somebody else pointed out to him that, yes, you did that, and you also made a trade from said office. So there you go. That's a thing. With all that being said, Michael Lorenzen goes to Philadelphia for their 5th highest prospect, young man by the name of Hyung Lee. He is from Taiwan. He's 20 years old. He's hitting .283 at high A right now, so he's probably in West Michigan at this point. I believe he might have gotten promoted to Double A just before being traded, so I don't know where the Tigers are going to send him, if they sent him to West Michigan or if they sent him to Erie. But he was hitting .283. He's walked more than he struck out. So apparently he has pretty good plate discipline, and he has some good raw power, which is a surprise considering that he's from Taiwan. Taiwan doesn't develop a lot of power hitters. The Asian baseball in general does not develop a lot in the way of power. Okay, Shohei Ohtani is the exception. And then people will sit there and throw Hideki Matsui at me and say, here, there you go, have a power hitter. People will say that Yoshida is a power hitter. I think Yoshida's just a hitter more than he is a power hitter, and I think that Hideki Matsui was the same way. He was just a hitter more than he was a power hitter, and Shohei Ohtani is just a generational talent. What he does is just, there's not been anything like it ever. So he's in a class of his own. And I'm saying this after watching him throw a complete game shutout, a complete game one hitter against Detroit in a doubleheader. That was the first game. And he went 0 for 4, 0 for 5, whatever it was. And then come up and hit 2 home runs in the second game, one of them which left the bat at 117 miles an hour. So as the DH in the second game, he hit 2 homers and left the game early because of cramps. Gee, you know what? I'd cramp up too if I hit a ball a ball that left my bat at 117 miles an hour. I'd cramp up for about a year. So from that standpoint, he in and of himself is just better than any baseball player on this planet right now. So Ha-Young Lee was the Phillies' 5th prospect overall, and Keith Law basically said if he doesn't hit for power, then basically you've got Nick Madrigal. Well, you know what? I'll take Nick Madrigal on my squad. Dude can hit. Dude knows how to hit. And dude knows how to play some defense. So I'll take... If I traded Michael Lorenzen, who was going to leave my team anyway at the end of the year, for possibly 5 or 6 years of Nick Madrigal, I'd take that. Thank you very much. The big news was that Eduardo Rodriguez did not move. Now, before Saturday, one would say that Eduardo Rodriguez was the top pitcher on the trade market. Then Steve Cohen dealt Max Scherzer to Texas. Okay, that's the top pitcher on the market. He's been moved. So Eduardo Rodriguez is still the top pitcher on the market, except for the fact that Justin Verlander waived his no-trade clause to go back to Houston. So now Eduardo Rodriguez was the 3rd best pitcher on the market. And Detroit apparently had a deal in place with LA, with the Dodgers, who was one of the teams on Eduardo Rodriguez's 10-team no-trade clause list. And apparently they'd been talking to Eduardo during the entire time. And at the end of the day, with like an hour left in the before the trade deadline, Eduardo Rodriguez said, "Thanks, but no thanks. I just don't feel comfortable with this." And you know what? That's his right. And I have no problems with that. None whatsoever. That is his right. And despite what Dan O'Dowd says, washed up old stick that he is, he was offered that option by Al Avila, and he took it. Now, you can sit there and say, well, Al Avila wasn't a very competent general manager. Okay, you go ahead and say that, because I've said it a million times, and I agree. Al Avila is not that bright when it comes to being a GM and making a deal. When Al Avila calls, people pick up their phone and they go, "Sucker." So clearly the brains behind the Tigers' championships and their dominance over the Central Division for really eight years was Dave Dombrowski. Al Avila had nothing to do with those championships. Al Avila might be a great scout. He may have been a great scout. His dad might have been a great scout. His son was an okay catcher. But he was not a very good baseball executive. Just wasn't. And that's the way of it. Again, sorry for the air conditioner noise. I really can't help it. The effects chain that I thought was on this is not, and it's not working. So you're just going to have to deal with it, because I sweat for nobody. So Eduardo Rodriguez was given a no-trade clause, and he exercised it. There is nothing wrong with that. There is no reason why Dan O'Dowd should sit there on national television and say players of his ilk should not get no-trade clauses. You know what the only reason that Eduardo Rodriguez wasn't in the All-Star game was this year? Mr. O'Dowd, Mr. former general manager. The fact that he ruptured a A4 pulley on his left index finger. He did that at the end of May. He doesn't do that. Michael Lorenzen's not your all-star selection, boy. Eduardo Rodriguez is. Do you know why Eduardo Rodriguez didn't want to go to L.A., son? The reason that he exercised the no-trade clause that he was given, that he earned at the end of the 2021 season, when he walked away from a qualifying offer with Boston? He didn't go to L.A. because for 2 months last year, he was separated from his wife. That's right. His wife moved out. She took their kids and she left. Now, they were able to work it out. They've been able to work it out. Eduardo Rodriguez has made amends with his teammates. And you know what? Eduardo Rodriguez is a better man than Dan O'Dowd. I will say that until I'm blue in the face. Players of his ilk. He's not ilk. He'd have been an all-star last year. He'd have been an all-star this year. The only reasons that he wasn't is because he decided, you know what, my family's more important than my teammates. My family's more important than my career. And he got hurt. And once again, he's shown the Tigers that his family's more important than his career. Because he could have gone to L.A. Oh, it's only 2 months. Actually, son, it's more like 3. Because you've got August, you got September. The Dodgers are built to go deep into the playoffs, so now you're into October. His kids are going to be in school at that point. Right now, it's nothing for them to fly up from Miami to Detroit on a Friday, spend a couple days, fly back late Sunday evening, get back home to Miami in time for the kids to go back to school Monday morning. Try doing that from Miami to LA. Ain't gonna happen. So I am floored that Dan O'Dowd would sit there and blame the player for exercising his right and call the player ilk. I'm absolutely floored. Shame, shame, shame on you, sir. And I get Harold Reynolds not wanting to argue on a national TV show. I understand that. I think Harold Reynolds handled that as classily as you could, because you know HR was steaming. I think Scott Harris handled it the right way. Scott Harris handled it with class, because he specifically said, when he was talking to reporters, You know what? He earned that right. He exercised that right. There's nothing wrong with that. And if we get 2 months of Eduardo Rodriguez as part of his exercising his no trade clause, I'm happy with that. And I'm okay with that. That's a player that he didn't sign. Will he try to re-sign him in the offseason if Eduardo Rodriguez opts out? Sure. And a lot of people will sit there and say, oh, well, you had a chance to trade Eduardo Rodriguez and you didn't get anything back for him. So now you're left with nothing for his 2 years there. No, that's not true. Far be it from me to criticize a player for putting his family before his career and for exercising the right that he had in his contract. Far be it from me to criticize a player for negotiating a contract that gave him that right. Just won't do it. I've criticized a lot of players for a lot of things. Hell, Javi Baez knows how I feel. If he doesn't, he probably doesn't, because he probably doesn't listen to this podcast. But if he did, he would know that I am not one of his fans. All right? There's other players out there that I have taken to task for things that they've done and things that they've said. Not this time. I'll be the first to blame a player for something. I'll also be the first to defend that player when they've done things right. Eduardo Rodriguez did things right. And for anybody to sit there and say, oh, well, he should have done this, he should have done that. No, dude, you're wrong. Shut up. Sit down. You're wrong. End of story. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You're done. Detroit had a rough homestand last week. They dropped 5 games. They won 2. They beat the Giants once, completing a series sweep that started in April, and they beat the Padres once. The other 2 games against the Padres, we don't want to talk about, because we're talking double digits, folks. We're not going to go there. The Angels, yeah, they beat up on Detroit pretty good too. Then Detroit goes on the road to Florida and loses 2 out of 3 in Florida. And really, in all honesty, the 2 losses, they were actually in until the very end. And if some pitches are executed better, if Reese Olson pitches better on Friday, and if some better pitches are executed on Sunday by the aforementioned Chasen Shreve and Jason Foley, Chasen and Jason, you go figure that out, then they win. They actually sweep that series. But they didn't. And that's all right. Detroit's 47-60. Sorry, 48-60. If they win the next 27 of the next 45, 27 of the next 44 games, 27 of the next 54 games, sorry, they will make that 75 wins that I keep talking about. If they don't, they won't. And I'm going to keep jumping on this 75 win thing until they're 12 games under 500 with 11 games left. When that becomes the case, then I will eat crow. Sorry. I called it bad. When they are so far out of it that that there's no way that they can win 75 games, then I will admit my mistake. I'll admit that I was wrong. But this is a 75 win team, folks. Mark my words. They're going to play 500 baseball for the rest of the year. 27 up, 27 down. They will be 75 and 87, and that's still an improvement over the 66 wins from last year. Oh, well, they may not win 27 games. All right, if they win 22 games, that puts them at 70 wins. That's still an improvement over last year. I do not see this team playing that badly. They're done with the National League East. They got 1 series against Boston, 2 series against New York in the American League East. All right. Outside of that, they've got 1 series this weekend against Tampa. Then they're done with the American League East. They've got the Dodgers to play in the NL West. Then they're done with them. They've got a series in LA against the Angels and a series in Oakland. And 1 more series against Houston. That series is at home. They took 2 out of 3 in Houston, in case you didn't remember. Now that's a different Houston team than what's out there now. But you know what? They beat Verlander before. They can do it again. So they got 3 more series against the American League West. The rest of their series, 1 against Kansas City, 2 against Chicago, 2 against Cleveland, 2 against Minnesota. Here's a news flash, folks. They're above 500 in their division. They are actually playing better in their division this year than they have done in the last 3 years. I dare to say the last 4 years. I know I can say that they're playing better than they have in the last 4 years, because in 2019 they were 47 and 115 or whatever it was. Yeah, 47 and 115. 47 and 114 because 1 game got rained out in Chicago. At the end of the year, it didn't mean anything to either club. Chicago's in the middle. Chicago basically sold off all their good players. Sure, Tim Anderson's still there. Sure, Luis Robert is still there. Eloy Jimenez is still there. Dylan Cease is still there. Lance Lynn, gone. Lucas Giolito, gone. Ronaldo Lopez, gone. Oh, and they've got 1 more series against the Cubs and 1 more series against the Reds, which are winnable series. This team can finish with 75 wins. I don't see them getting any more than that because of who they have to play. I don't think they're taking 2 out of 3 against the Dodgers. I know they're not going to Oakland and taking 2 out of 3 against Oakland. I know they're not going to take 2 out of 3 against the Angels in LA. I don't see them taking 2 out of 3 against Houston. I don't see them taking 2 out of 3 in Boston against the Red Sox. I honestly don't know how they're going to do against the Yankees. But I think if you factor in the fact that they're not going to get swept by any of those teams either, and you throw in the fact that they've handled Kansas City, they got 1 more series left with them. That's at home. They've handled Minnesota. That's a home and home. They've handled Cleveland. That's a home and home. They've done okay against Chicago. That's a home and home. Yeah. I like my odds. I really do. You want to get in touch with the show, you can. Mastodon is at TB Podcast. Twitter at Podcast Tigers. At TB Podcast at tweezecake.social for Mastodon. At Podcast Tigers on Twitter. YouTube, youtube.com/at TB Podcast. You can email the show, tigersbaseballpodcast at gmail.com. It's the world's longest email address, and I'm proud of that. I want to thank Anchor for distributing the podcast. If you have not subscribed to us on YouTube, check us out there. Ring that bell, and you'll get notified whenever I upload a new podcast. So with that, I want to say thank you to all for listening. Until next week, I'm Chris Schulte saying goodbye and let's go Tigers.